Money isn't the same as class. My wife said I wasn't fit to stand beside her at an investor's gala, replacing me with a rich heir. She didn't know I could bring her family down instantly. My name is Chris, and at 32 years old, I have just discovered that my own wife considers me a failure, unfit to rub shoulders with the elite she calls family. The most ironic part is that 3 years ago, when I met Victoria, I was the founder of a tech startup that had revolutionized the urban logistics system. My company, Streamflow, had been sold to a multinational for $80 million. $80 million that allowed her to maintain the luxurious standard of living she was accustomed to when the Whitmore family empire began to crumble from within. Victoria, are you serious? I literally saved your father's company from bankruptcy last year. The algorithms I developed increased efficiency by 40%. She sighed with that expression of impatience that had become her trademark in recent months. Darling, you don't understand. It's one thing to have money. It's something completely different to have class. And class can't be bought. Her words echoed in the room like a final decree. Class can't be bought. As if my 2 degrees from MIT, as if the innovations I had created, as if the fact that I had literally saved her family's company were irrelevant. Besides, Victoria continued, getting up and smoothing the Valentino dress I had bought her. Mom has already invited someone more appropriate to accompany me. Richard Penton. You met at the club last month. Richard Penton, the heir to a banking fortune who had never worked a single day in his life, but who had the right last name and frequented the right places. As Victoria spoke, my mind quickly processed the situation. The signs had been there for months. The family gatherings from which I was subtly excluded, the whispers that fell silent when I entered the room, the way my father-in-law, Charles Whitmore, had begun to treat me with a cold, distant courtesy. But what Victoria and the Whitmore family didn't know was that I had perceived much more than I let on. In the last 6 months, while they treated me like a tolerated intruder, I had discovered interesting information about the company's finances. Information that explained why they needed to maintain appearances at this gala so badly. It's okay, Victoria, I replied calmly, taking off my tie and hanging it in the closet. I'll stay home tonight. She seemed relieved, as if she had expected a fight that never came. Great. I knew you would understand. What she didn't know was that I had spent the last few weeks meticulously documenting all the irregularities I had discovered at Whitmore Industries. While she was getting ready to impress investors with facades and last names, I was sitting on a ticking time bomb of information that could blow up the entire house of cards they had built. If you're enjoying this story full of unexpected twists, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how this apparent moment of humiliation would become the catalyst for a revenge that no Whitmore would ever forget. Victoria left the room for the event that would define her family's future, and I stood there, smiling for the first time in months, knowing exactly what would happen when the gala lights came on. 2 hours later, I was sitting in my home office, a room that Victoria had decorated with expensive Italian furniture, but which now seemed more like a mausoleum than a workplace. The silence of the empty house echoed around me as I opened my laptop and relived the last 6 months of my married life. Victoria Whitmore, only daughter of Charles and Margaret Whitmore, heiress to an empire that spanned 3 generations. When I met her at a charity event in Greenwich, she was different, intelligent, perceptive, seemingly genuine in her interest in technology and innovation. Do you really think you can change the world with algorithms? She asked me that first night, her blue eyes shining with curiosity. 3 years later, I discovered that curiosity was purely strategic. The transformation began subtly. First, it was the constant corrections of my pronunciation of French words. Then came the suggestions about my attire, my posture, the way I held my fork during formal dinners. Chris, darling, people of our social standing don't wear digital watches, she told me one day, giving me a Patek Philippe that cost more than most people earn in 2 years. Our social standing, as if I were her charity project. But the real Charles Whitmore, the family patriarch, turned out to be even worse. Charles was the kind of man who measured a person's worth by the year they graduated from university and the golf club they belonged to. At 62, he ran Whitmore Industries with the arrogance of someone who had never faced a day of real adversity in his life. Christopher, he always called me by my full name, as if my last name were too vulgar for his lips. I hope you understand that success in the business world requires certain subtleties. Subtleties that are not always taught in technical schools. Technical schools, as if MIT were a second-rate school. At the first family gathering I was invited to 2 years ago, Charles made it clear what my place in the hierarchy was. We were in the study of the Whitmore Mansion in East Hampton, surrounded by portraits of ancestors who had built their fortune on railroads and steel. Whitmore Industries, Charles proclaimed, holding a glass of $5,000 scotch, is more than a company, it's a legacy. And legacies require people who understand the weight of tradition. Margaret Whitmore, the matriarch, was even more subtle in her cruelty. She had a gift for making devastating comments disguised as maternal concern. "Chris, darling, are you sure that haircut is appropriate for tomorrow's dinner? We will be hosting the British consul, and first impressions are so important." First impressions, as if I were a child preparing for a recital. But it was in the last 6 months that I discovered the true rotten nature of this family. It all started when Victoria asked me to review some of the company's financial documents. "Could you take a look at these reports, Chris? Dad said your experience in data analysis could be useful." Useful. That's how they saw me, a convenient tool. What I found in the documents was disturbing. Whitmore Industries was systematically overbilling government contracts, using a complex network of subsidiary companies to launder money through tax havens. But the most shocking discovery was that they were diverting funds from a charitable foundation they managed, a foundation that supposedly helped children in need, but actually served as a personal money laundering machine. Millions of dollars intended for educational programs had been diverted to renovate the family's summer home in Martha's Vineyard. For weeks I kept this information to myself, trying to understand the full scope of the corruption. Every document I analyzed revealed new layers of fraud, forged contracts, rigged bids, bribes disguised as consulting fees. And Victoria knew everything. I found out one Tuesday night when she received a call from Charles while we were having dinner. "Yes, Dad, I know about the auditors. Chris has already sorted out the quarterly reports." "No, he doesn't suspect anything. He still thinks he's helping the company modernize." She spoke of me as if I were a particularly well-trained pet. That night, I pretended to be asleep while she showered and accessed her phone. The emails between her and Charles were a full confession, not only about the financial fraud, but about how they planned to use my reputation to clean up the company's image when necessary. "Christopher will be useful if we need a technical scapegoat," Charles had written. "Men like him are disposable when they no longer serve our purposes." Disposable. For 3 years I had believed I was building a marriage. In reality, they were setting me up to be the perfect culprit when the house of cards collapsed. From that moment on, I began to meticulously document everything. Every conversation, every document, every suspicious transaction. I installed recording apps on my phone, backed up all the files on secure servers, and began to build a complete file on the Whitmore family's criminal operation. But that wasn't enough. A simple expose would be predictable, and they had expensive lawyers and political connections that could minimize any scandal. I needed something more elegant, more devastating. It was then that I discovered that Charles had scheduled today's gala specifically to announce a merger with a European conglomerate, a merger that depended on the approval of international investors who had no idea of the Whitmore's true corrupt nature. And I had information that could not only cancel that merger, but completely destroy the family's reputation in the international financial market. While Victoria was getting ready to impress people who considered my money good enough, but my presence inadequate, I was orchestrating the most spectacular downfall that Manhattan's high society had seen in decades. The clock read 7:45 p.m. The gala had started 15 minutes ago. I opened my laptop and began drafting the first of a series of emails that I would send to the 15 largest investors present at the event. Emails that contained photographic evidence of all the crimes I had documented over the last 6 months. Victoria thought I wasn't sophisticated enough to rub shoulders with her elite. In 2 hours, she would discover just how sophisticated the fall of an entire dynasty can be. 8 hours and 15 minutes into the night, the gala was in full swing, and I had just received a message that would change everything. "Chris, you need to see this urgently." It was Jessica Chun, my former partner at Streamflow, who now worked as an independent auditor for large corporations. She had sent me a link to an encrypted file, accompanied by a single line. "I've managed to access Whitmore's internal servers. It's worse than we imagined." I downloaded the file with trembling hands, not from nervousness, but from anticipation. What I found in the documents surpassed my worst suspicions. Charles Whitmore was not only diverting money from a charitable foundation, he was operating a pyramid scheme that spanned 17 countries, using the family's reputation to lure innocent investors who lost their life savings. But the most devastating part was in a folder labeled Operation Cleanup. It was a detailed plan to frame me as the true mastermind behind all the fraud. Forged documents with my digital signature, backdated contracts suggesting I was the technical consultant responsible for the fraudulent systems. Even fake emails in which I supposedly instructed Charles on how to conceal the crimes. "The boy is perfect," Charles had written to Margaret in a message from 6 months ago. "Young, ambitious, with a tech background. When everything collapses, he will be the ideal scapegoat." Victoria is already sowing the seeds of his emotional instability. In 6 months, no one will question that he confesses everything before fleeing the country. Fleeing the country. They had planned to frame me and then fake my escape, leaving me as an international fugitive while they continued their operations with clean hands. My phone rang. "Victoria." "Chris, darling, how are you feeling? I hope you're not feeling too lonely at home." Her voice had that poisonous sweetness I had learned to recognize. "I'm fine, Victoria. How's the gala going?" "Oh, wonderful. Dad is introducing you to some investors. He's telling them how you've developed some incredible systems for the company. They are very interested in meeting you in person next week." Incredible systems. Translation. They were laying the groundwork to present me as the genius behind the technology before turning me into the criminal behind the crimes. "How interesting," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "And what exactly is he saying about me?" "Well," Victoria hesitated, and I could hear her choosing her words carefully. "He is mentioning that you have been responsible for some financial innovations, international transfer systems, optimization of tax structures. You know, the kind of things that impress European investors. International transfer systems, optimization of tax structures." They were literally building my criminal biography in real time before international witnesses who could corroborate that I was the mastermind behind it all. "Victoria," I said calmly, "I have to ask you something important." "Of course, honey. At any point in the last 3 years, have you ever truly loved me? Or have I always just been part of a larger plan?" The silence on the other end of the line lasted 15 seconds. 15 seconds that told me everything I needed to know. "Chris, what a strange question. Of course I love you. Why are you asking me that?" But her voice had changed, the automatic tone of someone reciting a poorly rehearsed script. "Just curious," I replied. "Enjoy the rest of the evening." I hung up before she could answer. At 9 p.m., I received another call. This time, it was from Marcus Webb, an investigative journalist from the Financial Times who had tried to contact me 3 times in the last few weeks. I had ignored his calls, thinking they were about the sale of my startup. "Chris Morrison, I'm Marcus Webb. I need to speak with you urgently about Whitmore Industries." "What about it?" "We are investigating massive financial irregularities. We have sources that suggest you may have relevant information." He paused significantly. "Or that you may be being set up to be held responsible for crimes you did not commit." My blood ran cold. "How do you know that?" "I have sources inside the company, and in the last 48 hours, 3 different people have contacted me with evidence pointing to you as the mastermind of an international fraud scheme." Very convenient evidence, too convenient. Marcus had smelled the plot even before I realized its scope. "Marcus, can we meet early tomorrow morning? I have a few things to show you that will be of great interest." "Of course, but Chris, if you have evidence, you need to act fast. My sources suggest that something big is going to happen next week, something that may leave you with no options, something big next week." After hanging up, I reopened the files Jessica had sent me. I searched for timelines, dates, anything that indicated the schedule of the Whitmore's plan. I found it in a folder called Final Implementation. Next Friday, 7 days from today, Charles would publicly announce that he had discovered irregularities in the systems I had supposedly developed. He would publicly accuse me of fraud, present the forged evidence, and initiate criminal proceedings against me. That same week, Victoria would begin divorce proceedings, claiming she had discovered my true nature and felt betrayed and manipulated. And while I faced criminal charges and a public, humiliating divorce, they would transfer all remaining assets to offshore accounts and start a new life. 7 days. They had given me exactly 7 days of blissful ignorance before completely destroying my life. But in doing so, they had also given me 7 days to prepare the farewell gift they deserved. I called Jessica. Jess, I need you to cancel all your commitments for next week. Why? Because we are going to dismantle a criminal empire, and you are the only person I trust to do it right. Chris, are you sure you want to get into this? The Whitmores have expensive lawyers and political connections. If something goes wrong. Jessica, I interrupted her. They didn't just use me and plan to get rid of me. They stole $80 million from innocent people, retirees who lost their life savings, families who invested in their children's education, and they are planning to do it again on an even larger scale. I paused for a moment, looking out my office window at the city lights. If we let this go, we won't just be silent accomplices, we'll be cowards. Jessica sighed. Okay. What do you need me to do? First, I need you to prepare a complete presentation with all the evidence, something we can deliver simultaneously to the FBI, the Financial Times, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the international investors present at today's gala. It will take me days to organize it properly. You have until Thursday. On Friday, when Charlie gets on stage to publicly accuse me, I want him to discover that his own destruction is already being broadcast live to the entire world. While Victoria was enjoying her gala night, believing she had successfully kept me away from the real investors, I was assembling a coalition that included some of the country's top investigative journalists, federal auditors, and lawyers specializing in international financial crimes. Next Friday, she would discover that the person she considered unfit to circulate among the elite had built a network of contacts far more powerful and influential than any of the Whitmore social circles. The difference is that my contacts were people who actually worked to make the world a fairer place and were eager for a story like this one. Thursday, 5 a.m. I hadn't slept in the last 48 hours, but my mind had never been clearer. Jessica had arrived the night before with 3 suitcases full of printed documents, 2 laptops, and a determination I hadn't seen in her since the Streamflow days. Chris, this is bigger than we imagined, she said, spreading piles of papers across the dining table Victoria had chosen to impress important guests. The irony was not lost on me. The Whitmore Industries scheme extends to 23 countries. They are not only stealing from American investors, they are operating an international money laundering system that involves dictators, cartels, and Russian oligarchs. I picked up one of the folders she had marked as Category A evidence. Inside were photographs of Charles Whitmore at private dinners with people I recognized from international news, men who financed wars and dictatorships, women who ran human trafficking networks. Jessica, how did you get access to this? She smiled, and for a moment I saw the brilliant hacker I had known in college before she became a respected corporate auditor. Remember my master's thesis on the vulnerabilities of offshore financial systems? I never stopped monitoring those networks. Whitmore Industries appeared on my radar 2 years ago, but I didn't have an entry point until you contacted me. Over the next 6 hours, we built a complete map of the Whitmore's criminal operation. It wasn't just corporate fraud. It was an international criminal organization that used the respectability of the American family to facilitate crimes on a global scale. The most ingenious thing, Jessica continued, is how they used your technological reputation to create the perfect digital infrastructure. The algorithms you developed to optimize legitimate transfers were modified to mask criminal transactions. My own codes, distorted to serve purposes I never imagined. The violation was personal and technical at the same time. At 11 a.m., we had an unexpected visitor. Marcus Webb arrived accompanied by 2 people who completely changed the game. Chris, I want to introduce you to Diane Foster from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit and Anton Kozlov, an investigative journalist from the BBC. Diane was a woman in her 50s with eyes that seemed to see through corporate lies like X-rays. Anton, a naturalized American Russian, specialized in exposing international money laundering networks. Mr. Morrison, Diane said, examining the documents we had organized. These proofs match an investigation we've been keeping secret for 18 months. You may have provided us with the missing pieces. Anton was photographing documents with a professional camera, his hands moving with the precision of someone who has already unmasked dozens of similar schemes. The Whitmore Network, he explained in English with a slight Russian accent, is not only known in the United States. In Eastern Europe, There are entire families who have lost their savings in investments promoted by intermediaries connected to Charles Whitmore. During the afternoon, my apartment became an operations center. Diane brought in 2 additional agents. Marcus contacted the editors of the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post. Anton contacted colleagues in London, Zurich, and Hong Kong. But the most crucial moment came when we decided how to approach the issue of timing. Charles plans to publicly accuse me tomorrow night, I explained to the group. If we act sooner, he might destroy the evidence and flee the country. And if we wait too long, Diane replied, he might frame you convincingly enough to complicate our investigation. It was Anton who suggested the most elegant strategy. We let him make the public accusation. We let him expose himself completely with cameras rolling and witnesses present. And then, at the exact moment he finishes his presentation, we reveal the whole truth. A real-time counterattack, Jessica murmured, her eyes shining with admiration for the audacity of the plan. At 6 p.m., while Victoria was getting ready for another social dinner at her parents' house, I was on a video conference with federal prosecutors in 3 different time zones. She came into the office to say goodbye, wearing the pearl necklace I had bought for our 2nd wedding anniversary. Chris, darling, aren't you going to have dinner today? Mom has gone to a lot of trouble to make your favorite dish. Her favorite dish, as if the last 3 years of manipulation could be erased with a spinach lasagna. I'm not hungry. Victoria, enjoy the family evening. She kissed me on the forehead, a gesture that once conveyed affection and now seemed like a mark of betrayal. I love you, she said. And for an instant, her voice conveyed something that could have been sincerity. I know, I replied without looking away from the computer screen. After she left, I resumed the video conference with renewed determination. The plan was taking shape with surgical precision. Tomorrow night, when Charles Whitmore took the stage at the Plaza Hotel to give his presentation on corporate innovation and integrity, he would be surrounded by journalists, investors, federal authorities, and television cameras. He would publicly accuse me of international fraud. He would present forged evidence and give his speech about how he had discovered the true nature of the man who had married his daughter. And at the exact moment he finished his performance, he would discover that all the attendees had already received a complete dossier of his own criminal activities, delivered simultaneously by federal agents, investigative journalists, and international auditors. If you have followed this journey of shocking discoveries, subscribe to the channel now, because what will happen next Friday will be the most spectacular twist the Manhattan elite has ever witnessed. Anton had managed to get access to the security cameras at the Plaza Hotel. Diane had a team of 20 agents strategically positioned at the event. Marcus was coordinating with editors for simultaneous publication in 12 international media outlets. And I had a final revelation that not even Jessica knew about yet. In the last 72 hours, I had silently transferred all the assets Charles thought he was stealing back to their original victims. Account by account, family by family, using the same systems he had corrupted to reverse every criminal transaction of the last 3 years. When he tried to access the offshore accounts tomorrow morning, he would discover that $80 million had simply vanished. Not destroyed, returned. To the retired families in Florida who lost their savings, to the young European entrepreneurs who trusted in fraudulent investments, to the charities that were robbed to finance mansion renovations. Victoria came home at 10 p.m. and found me exactly where she had left me, working at the computer. How was dinner? I asked without looking at her. Wonderful. Dad is very excited about tomorrow. He said he'll finally be able to set things right. Set things right. As she showered, preparing to sleep next to the man she planned to destroy, I was finalizing the last details of what would be the most spectacular and well-deserved downfall in the history of the American elite. Tomorrow, Charles Whitmore would discover that underestimating someone's intelligence is the first step toward one's own destruction. And Victoria would learn that marrying for convenience has consequences that go far beyond divorce. Friday, 7:15 p.m., the Plaza Hotel was at its most elegant with 200 of the most influential international investors occupying their red velvet armchairs in the main ballroom. I was sitting at a table reserved for the press with a technical advisor card that Marcus had gotten me. 3 rows in front of me, Victoria was chatting animatedly with Richard Pemberton, both radiating the confidence of those who believe the future is secure. Charles Whitmore took the stage at 8 o'clock sharp. At 62, He commanded attention with the presence of someone born to lead. His tuxedo was impeccable, his posture exuded authority, and his smile conveyed that poisonous confidence I had learned to recognize and detest. Investors, distinguished colleagues, members of the press, his voice resonated through the state-of-the-art sound system. Today is a historic moment for Whitmore Industries and for the future of international investment. Polite applause filled the room. In the front rows, I could see delegations from European, Asian, and Middle Eastern investment funds. Exactly the people Charles needed to impress to save his crumbling empire. During my 40 years in this industry, he continued, I have learned that true innovation arises when tradition meets technology. And today I am pleased to announce that Whitmore Industries has not only adopted this philosophy, but has completely revolutionized our approach to global markets. A message from Diane Foster appeared on my phone, agents in position awaiting your signal. Another from Anton Kosloff, editors from 12 international media outlets connected. Live stream authorized. A third from Jessica. Evidence loaded onto secure servers. One click and everything will be broadcast simultaneously. Charles was explaining how the innovative systems developed by our internal technical team had allowed the company to expand into previously inaccessible markets. Systems I had created, now described as products of his business genius. Our growth over the last 3 years, he proclaimed, was the result of a strategic vision that combined advanced data analysis with financial structures optimized for emerging markets. Translation: international money laundering disguised as technological innovation. It was 8:21 when Charles made the transition I was waiting for. Unfortunately, his voice took on a tone of calculated regret. Not all members of our corporate family shared our values of integrity and transparency. The room fell silent. That was the signal we had anticipated. We have recently discovered serious irregularities in our financial systems. Irregularities that, after a meticulous investigation, have been traced to a single source. He paused dramatically, letting the tension build. Christopher Morrison, who had joined our family by marrying my daughter Victoria, systematically exploited his position of trust to carry out scams that compromised not only our corporate resources, but also the funds intended for the charitable institutions we manage. A murmur of surprise rippled through the audience. Victoria in the third row held Richard's arm with a convincing expression of pain. The evidence, Charles continued, pulling a folder from the podium, includes forged contracts with his digital signature, records of unauthorized transactions, and communications in which he detailed his plans to use our family's reputation as a cover for criminal activities. He was now distributing copies of the forged evidence to members of the press in the front rows. Documents that Jessica and I had seen during our analysis, fabricated with a sophistication that would have convinced any superficial investigator. It is with deep regret, Charles declared, that I announce we have initiated criminal proceedings against Christopher Morrison. Whitmore Industries will not tolerate criminals manipulating our 90-year reputation for fraudulent purposes. The applause began in the front rows, led by Richard Pemberton and other members of the social elite present. It was at that moment that I sent a single message to Jessica. Now, what happened in the next 15 seconds was a symphony of coordination that I will never forget. Simultaneously, all the investors present received a push notification on their smartphones. Editors in 12 countries published identical articles with complete evidence. Federal agents rose from their strategic positions in the room, discreetly identifying themselves to the event organizers. But the masterstroke came when the giant LED screens installed on the sides of the stage, which were supposed to show graphs of the company's growth, began to display something completely different. Photographs of Charles Whitmore in private scenes with known Russian oligarchs, bank documents showing transfers to tax havens, audio recordings of phone conversations in which he discussed how to use the boy as a scapegoat when things got hot. Charlie stopped mid-sentence. His confident expression transformed into confusion as he realized that the people in the audience were no longer looking at him, but at the screens behind him. Technically, a voice amplified by the sound system resonated. This evidence was obtained through the same systems you just accused me of corrupting. All heads turned to my table. I was standing holding a wireless microphone that Anton had discreetly provided me. For the investors present here, I continued. The information you have just received on your devices contains complete evidence that Charles Whitmore has operated an international money laundering network for over 5 years, using charitable funds and fraudulent investments to finance criminal networks in 17 countries. The silence in the room was so absolute that I could hear the hum of the air conditioning system. Mr. Morrison, Charles tried to regain control with a tension in his voice he could no longer hide. Those accusations are documented by federal agents of the FBI, I interrupted, audited by international experts in financial crimes, and verified by investigative journalists from at least 6 different countries. It was at that moment that Diane Foster stood up from her seat in the second row, showing her federal ID. Charles Whitmore, her voice cut through the ballroom like a razor. You are under arrest on suspicion of international conspiracy to launder money, investment fraud, and embezzlement of charity funds. The chaos that followed was indescribable. European investors rose simultaneously, making calls to cancel any association with Whitmore Industries. Journalists ran to the exits, broadcasting live to their newsrooms. Members of New York's social elite whispered among themselves, quickly calculating how to publicly distance themselves from the family. But my attention was focused on Victoria. She had risen from her seat, her face covered by a mask of genuine shock. It wasn't shock at her father's arrest, but shock because her perfect plan had been completely dismantled by someone they considered incapable of such sophistication. Our eyes met across the tumultuous ballroom, and for a moment I saw not the calculating manipulator who had tried to destroy me, but a 30-year-old woman who had just witnessed the complete disintegration of the world she knew. "Chris," she murmured even from a distance, and I could read her lips forming the words, "How did you know?" I smiled for the first time in months, not with bitterness or revenge, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had restored the balance of the universe. I walked toward her through the panicking crowd, stopping a meter away. "Victoria," I said calmly, "you've asked the wrong question." "How so?" she whispered. "The question isn't how I knew. The question is, why did you all assume I wouldn't?" Marcus Webb appeared by my side with television cameras capturing every second of our conversation. "For 3 years," I continued, "they treated me like a charity project, a tolerated intruder, someone whose intelligence was only useful when it suited their purposes, but they forgot something fundamental." Victoria was now crying. Tears streamed down her carefully applied makeup. "I built StreamFlow from scratch. I sold it for $80 million. I revolutionized the logistics systems used in 42 countries, and they really believed that someone with that capability wouldn't notice they were being manipulated." 2 tables away, Charles was being escorted by federal agents, his handcuffs shining under the ballroom lights. "Every document they forged," I continued, "contained metadata codes that I had implemented in the systems. Codes that allowed me to track not only when the documents were created, but on which computer, by which user, and how often they were edited." Victoria's face turned completely pale. All the phone conversations they had about how to frame me were recorded because 2 years ago I installed monitoring software on the company's communication systems. Software that you authorized, believing it would be used to protect trade secrets. Margaret Whitmore, who had spent the last 3 years treating me like a commoner unfit for her family, was now being questioned by journalists about her knowledge of her husband's criminal activities. "And Victoria," I said, lowering my voice to a whisper only she could hear, "when you asked me to review the company's financial documents 6 months ago, it was at that moment I realized you weren't a wife asking her husband for help. You were a criminal checking if your next victim would discover the crime before she was framed for it." She collapsed into her chair. The weight of the revelation finally hit her completely. Richard Penton, the appropriate man, who had replaced me as Victoria's escort, was discreetly heading toward the back exit, evidently reassessing his social climbing strategy. "But do you know what impresses me the most, Victoria?" I asked, watching the ballroom quickly empty. They had a legitimate company. They had resources, connections, real opportunities. They could have built something impressive and legal. She looked at me through her tears, waiting for the final blow. Instead, they chose greed, they chose corruption, and when they had the chance to correct their course, they chose to make me a scapegoat instead of taking responsibility for their own crimes. The room was almost empty now, just investigators, journalists, and a few onlookers watching the final moments of the Whitmore dynasty. "Chris," Victoria whispered, What's going to happen to me? I watched her for a long moment, remembering the woman I had loved or thought I loved before discovering that our entire life together had been a carefully orchestrated performance. Victoria, I replied, that's entirely up to you. Cooperate with the authorities, return the stolen money, and maybe in 10 years you'll have the chance to rebuild your life as a decent person. I paused and looked around the destroyed ballroom. Or you can continue to believe that you are a victim of circumstances, that I somehow unjustly destroyed your perfect family, and spend the rest of your life wondering how someone they considered inadequate managed to outsmart people who considered themselves superior. At that moment, Jessica appeared by my side, smiling with the satisfaction of someone who had helped execute the perfect plan. Chris, she said, the federal prosecutors want to talk to you officially to thank you for your cooperation and discuss how to proceed with compensation for the victims. I waved her on and turned back to Victoria one last time. Goodbye, Victoria. I sincerely hope you find a way to become the person I thought you were when we got married. I walked toward the exit, leaving behind not just a failed marriage, but an entire life based on lies and manipulation. Outside the Plaza Hotel, Marcus Webb was broadcasting live for the BBC, explaining how the fall of Whitmore Industries represented one of the largest corporate corruption exposés of the decade. Anton Kosloff was coordinating with international editors for simultaneous publication in 16 languages. And Diane Foster was on the phone with Washington, explaining how a single whistleblower had provided enough evidence to dismantle an international criminal network. But for me, the victory was not in the destruction of the family that had tried to destroy me. It was in understanding that by forcing me to discover who I really was when they stripped me of everything I thought defined me, they had inadvertently made me someone much stronger and more whole than I had ever been. And that I realized as I walked through the streets of Manhattan toward my new future. It was a gift that neither they nor I had anticipated. 6 months later, Charles Whitmore was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Victoria cooperated with the authorities and received 5 years of probation. Whitmore Industries was dissolved. The liquidation of its assets partially compensated the international victims, but the real transformation occurred in me. I used my experience to found a consultancy specializing in detecting corporate fraud. Today, I help families recover investments stolen by scams like the Whitmores. Victoria contacted me once 3 months after the trial. Chris, you could have warned me. You could have given me a chance to choose the right side. Victoria, I replied calmly. You had 3 years of opportunities. Every lie you told, every manipulation you executed was a choice. I only revealed who you all really were. The last contact I had with the family was through a lawyer. Margaret Whitmore had sent a letter apologizing for the misunderstandings. Misunderstandings. The arrogance remained intact, even in defeat. Today I live in a smaller apartment. I drive a simpler car, but I sleep soundly every night. I don't have a wife who sees me as a charity project, or in-laws who measure my worth by my last name. I have something better. Integrity. The lesson I learned is simple. When people judge you as unfit for their world, maybe the problem isn't that you don't fit in. Maybe it's that their world doesn't deserve you. Charles tried to make me a scapegoat, but he ended up freeing me from a life based on appearances and others' approval. The most elegant revenge is not to destroy your enemies. It's to build a life so authentic that their opinion becomes irrelevant. If this story of transformation and justice has moved you, subscribe to the channel now to see more stories of people who have turned betrayal into triumph. Because sometimes being considered inadequate for the elite is the first step to discovering that you have always been adequate for something much better.